Hello everyone, Phreak here with the patch 7.16 League of Legends rundown. This patch will be used for the North American and European LCS playoffs as well as regional qualifier for Worlds. I do not know if this patch will be used for any of the other leagues' playoff patches. That might be on 7.15 based on the league. And just as an extra note, the plan is still, I believe, for 7.18 to be Worlds. So the design team is basically using this to do a bunch of minor changes in 7.16 to try to make some champions a bit more interesting, to shape up the champion pools a bit more. And if anything is vastly out of line, they've got 7.17 and 7.18 to react. So let's talk about 7.16. It's actually a pretty small patch. The changes are all quite small as well. And we're going to start with a change to Caitlyn. Now, Caitlyn, as of today, when I looked at statistics, was the only champion in the entire pro scene of 7.15 to be 100% pick or ban. In 7.14, she was around 90%. And 7.14 is where the nerfs came in last time around. So even though Caitlyn is not too strong for solo queue, in fact, I think she's just slightly weaker than an average champion, but still totally playable. She is the most sought-after champion in pro play. When we contrast to the Zac nerfs from last patch, where it did drop Zac out of 100% pick ban, Caitlyn remained for 2 patches straight. If you're going to stay 100% pick ban, or close to it for 2 patches straight in pro play, you probably get nerfed again. I think that's reasonable. So Caitlyn is getting some nerfs. And I actually do think that these nerfs are aimed reasonably well. I still wanted to see her get some level of late game compensation back, because I think, again, she's a little bit weak for solo queue, and the pros seem to consider her early game power to be the primary strength, but that didn't happen. The result of these changes is Caitlyn is probably going to be substantially weak for solo queue. I'm going to guess maybe a 47% win rate. But this is probably enough to knock her off of 100% pick ban in pro play. I think she'll still be playable in pro, but we'll see what happens. There might be a very large metagame shake-up as a result. Anyway, let's get through the changes themselves. Her Q pass-through has been cut down by 1/4 from 2/3 to 1/2. Of course, the primary damage is unchanged. If a target has been snap trapped, they still take the full Q damage, things like this. So this is mostly a wave clear nerf. Also, I guess some of her poke, if you don't dodge her skill shots in lane, this matters as well. And then there is a pretty, actually it's not that big of a nerf to Yordle Snap Trap. So it's losing 20 to 0 base damage, and it's losing a 0.1 total attack damage ratio. Now I want to point out that this is on top of her already doing a headshot auto attack. So even though these numbers are like, wow, you went from 30 to 10 and from 0.7 to 0.6, these nerfs seem so big. So first of all, here's the pass-through damage changes. This is with no damage items, no runes, no masteries. It's just very simply, here's what Caitlyn would deal in damage to minions without runes or masteries. And again, it's a 25% cut. You're doing 3/4 as much damage, and you can see the pass-through damage certainly, meaningfully changed. And then here's how much damage you dealt auto-attacking someone who stood on a trap. It did 148 damage at level 1. You get 3 of them on the ground. If you step on a trap, you take 148 damage. This is now 122, which is still extremely high. And to be fair, again, the sum total of all of these things was that Caitlyn was slightly weak in solo queue, but this thing did 1 million freaking damage. So this was, again, this was a 0.1 attack damage ratio off something that already had a 2.2 attack damage ratio, because it was the 1.5 from headshot, then plus the 0.7 from a trap. So the end result is it's like a 5% damage nerf by a late game. The total ratio is nerfed by like 5%, right? Because it goes from 22 to 21 or something like this. So anyway, this is the magnitude of the nerfs. The magnitude of the nerf gets pushed towards a 5% nerf the more attack damage you have, again, is the result of the math. So a real Caitlyn level 1 has a Doran's Blade and attack damage marks and probably natural talent. So it's not quite a 17% damage nerf. Anyway, like I said, this will probably get her out of 100% pick ban in solo queue. And this will be like a 47% win rate champion. Or sorry, out of 100% pick ban in pro play. Probably like 47% in solo queue. All right, Fiora's getting some buffs because the last round of nerfs hit her too hard. This is what she had before the 714 nerfs. So here's the 713 values. Here's the 714 or 715 values to her passive, and here's the 716 values, which are in the most recent buffs. You can see the percent difference here comparing 15 to 16. Of course, there's no change before level 6. It goes up with ulti rank. And basically the end result is, if you compare to 713 Fiora, who is objectively overpowered, and then in 715 she was objectively underpowered, she basically got a 5% hit to her passive, which is not very large at the end of the day, and still lost the bonus move speed by just standing around someone of the ultimate. You still have to attack them now. So this, probably puts her back to about balanced. I expect we'll see her a little bit against like the Maokais and stuff of the world, but I guess we'll see. I think these are pretty reasonable changes. Bunch of bug fixes and such to Kayn. Basically all the dot stuff no longer stacks up as passive. There is a dev post that came up earlier today saying that they're aware this nerfs lane Kayn. They will assess afterwards what he might need to become balanced. That said, again, the primary role of the champion is to be a jungler, and in the meantime, lane Kayn is a nice to have, and they'll work on it, but oh well, you're not going to stack up super fast with Deathfire Touch and a Corrupting Potion anymore. Again, this nerfs lane Kayn quite a bit. I wouldn't play lane Kayn if I were you. I think jungle Kayn seems to be pretty reasonable, so hey, that's around. All right, so changes to Maokai. Maokai definitely became the #1 tank of this patch. He got pretty substantial buffs in 7.13. No one really realized it in 7.13, and then in 7.14, everyone kind of started jumping on board, and then by 7.15, everyone realized it as well, and Maokai has been really top tier for the last month or so. Basically, they're nerfing the percent health damage on his E. At this day and age, people are maxing Sapling Toss last, because everything else has more important level up incentives. I mean, okay, not literally everyone, but most people are maxing it last. And so a nerf to the level 1 value, even though it matches up at level 8, or at rank 5, is actually pretty meaningful. So here's Maokai and his damage output. Now, saplings have a base damage, which is 25 to 125 based on rank, and the percent health damage, which is now 6% to 8% based on rank. And so I used Maokai's own base stats as his sample target. Now, if you're hitting a blue buff at level 1, this could be different. I don't know if the damage hits the cap or not. I didn't do the math. There's a decent chance it did not hit the cap, and so this damage is valuable. Anyway, here is the amount of damage it dealt before versus after, of course. By cutting the ratio down to 3/4 and keeping the base damage the same, you can see the general percentage damage changes. You're losing about 17 to 20% damage to the early to mid game, and then of course once you max it out, it's the exact same ability. Now, if you were to max this first, then it's the same as soon as you max it, but this actually does. I didn't think it was going to be a very big change, but after doing the math, I realized it actually is a very big change. The base damage is so small that this is still a very large change. So this means that Maokai does not as easily get to solo a blue buff with sapling or solo the Raptors with saplings. He has mostly been used as a jungler, though he can certainly work in the top lane. At the end of the day, this is actually a pretty meaningful nerf to one of his damage abilities. So this hurts his jungle quite a bit. Keep in mind that the damage of this ability is doubled when you throw it into a brush, which is very common. So this is a pretty meaningful nerf, and this, I think, drops Maokai probably off of top tier. I think he's still very good. He still does Maokai things. His ultimate got buffed, his health, his regen got buffed, all those things exist. But he is, this hurts his jungle more than anything else. So I expect it to drop like maybe 1-2% win rate off his jungle, and maybe like 0.5% off his top lane. Buffs to Sion. That's cool. Unfortunately, not in time for MVP's top laner to get into playoffs, but that's okay. Just want to point out that this is unchanged, but he gets more bonus health per things that he stacks and hits, so that's kind of cool. Some nice little benefits for him. He'll be healthier throughout the game, and top lane Sion is the more frequent use case of Sion. I have seen support Sion. It's probably not really going to see it around. Anyway, cool stuff. He's going to be tankier. But, this moves the needle. He'll be another, sort of strong top lane. And with Maokai getting nerfed and then people seeing Sion get buffed, I expect pro top laners to try out Sion as a result. We have seen some Sion in pro play. I mentioned the MVP top laner before. I forget his name right away, but he's been playing him off and on for a while. But yeah, I mean, I think this moves the needle enough. People should try him, and they'll see if they like him or not. Sion is certainly pretty unreliable as an engaged tank, which is a lot of why we don't see him in pro play very much. I think he requires quite a bit of skill to be good at, and so that can result in difficulties as well. And then they got little buffs to his ulti damage. Basically, it's up by 1/3 at all ranks for the max damage, so that's cool. You know, again, if you're really good at Sion, you can land the ulti. You can do up to 1200 damage, which is exceptionally unlikely, but hey, if it happens, good for you. Great. Sion's a cool bro. I don't know if we're actually going to see him in pro play, but I think he's viable. Speaking of viable, we have buffs to Vi as well. You can't fat finger and cancel the E auto attack. I think this is actually generally a buff for solo queue. Doesn't mean a lot for pro, but that's okay. Actually, pretty substantial buffs to assault and battery cooldown. The numbers are right here. It's about 13%, which is pretty meaningful. The cooldown going down to 2 minutes at rank 1 instead of 2.5 roughly is actually a really big deal. A rank 1 ulti cooldown, especially when they're crowd control ultimates, are a really, really big deal for junglers. So if this means that Vi gets an extra gank off, you know, at level 8 or 9 or something because her ulti's back up, that's really, really meaningful. I think this does quite a bit to help out Vi. I don't think Vi was particularly weak overall. I think she was, I actually didn't look at the numbers before this video, but she's probably sitting close to 50%. So, you know, little love taps. I don't think we're going to see Vi in pro play. I think she's a bit too niche, but I think she is quite good. That said, it's interesting because we are in like a very sort of Kog'Maw heavy metagame where Vi is going to be good against a champion like that because Kog can in no way deal with Vi's cooldowns or her crowd control. QSS does basically nothing against her. There's minor implications there, but for the most part, Vi is going to get on top of you. And considering that we're also in a pretty Galio metagame as well, where Galio is popular, like Vi Galio is guaranteed backline access. So I'm a little surprised. Well, I guess I'm not surprised that we don't see Vi, but I think it's a good metagame for her. So I think she is worthy of picking up. Again, I don't know what mindset pros have. If they're just of the opinion that Vi can't do anything, she's useless, these buffs don't fix anything. Or if they say, hey, you know what? The Vi might work here. We have to deal with Kog'Maws every game. Maybe we start seeing her more. I'm not sure which is true, but I think she would be playable even if she isn't. All right, in this patch, this is basically says if you activate an unhit effect, like if you hit W on Jax or something, it'll consume your buff if you're hitting a ward. Whereas if it's just simply something like headshot or like silver bolts or whatever, like silver bolts wouldn't matter, but yeah, basically if it's a stack up, it no longer triggers. So like you don't lose Jax's R damage, but he'll still stack up the attack speed. The on-hit effects no longer trigger for Aatrox, but he doesn't heal anymore. Jace doesn't lose his R buff. Riven doesn't lose her passive buff. Great. Really minor, means almost nothing, but it's there. All right, and now that the major part of this patch really is there's about 7-ish different mid laners who got some tweaks this patch. Some are buffs, some are nerfs, some are both. The goal being to tweak the most played, professionally played mid laners and try to shake up the metagame a little bit more. Now, I don't think mid lane is actually in a very bad spot. I think a lot is viable there. I actually think mid or support, I'm not sure which, are probably the two most varied roles in pro play. So if I was to like pick a lane to shake up, I mean, that said, like, you know, there were nerfs to Maokai up there. There were nerfs to Zac last patch. There were nerfs to Caitlyn this patch. Like maybe those roles got hit appropriately. There was just one person on top and the rest were kind of fighting for attention. This is a pretty big shakeup of a lot of mid laners. So the question basically comes down to, because we know, again, one, that these were the most picked champions across pro play down the line. Like across the board, these were like the top 7 for the ones that got nerfed. And then for the ones that got buffed, it's like champions that we had seen in pro play before that seemed to be pretty healthy, that we were happy to keep around. So those were things like the small Azir buffs that came in the patch before, the small TF buffs that came in the patch before, and we see TF occasionally, and we might see Azir a little bit in the near future. Let's get into the changes though. Okay, so Cassiopeia, her base mana and mana per level are changing, and her Twin Fang damage with the poison buff is getting slightly increased at lower ranks and then nerfed at later ranks, but also gaining more ability power. This is very mathy. Phreak, what does it mean? Okay, here's Cassiopeia's mana pool. It's 715 versus 716. You can see she loses 10% of her max mana at level 1. So that's actually reasonably meaningful. A lot of pro Cassiopeias would walk and land with the Corrupting Potion, and then just spam E on you and make you leave lane because E doesn't pull aggro. It did like 54, 52, something like that, damage at level 1. I forget the exact numbers. Spoiler alert, it was 52. And you just hit people with the spell, and you had Corrupting Potion, you had Storm Raiders, and you just like kited them and threw fangs at them, and it was annoying. So by nerfing her mana pool by about 40, you have some meaningful changes in terms of her ability to bully. So this nerfs her early game quite a bit, unless you land poison, which is actually really cute, right? I think this is one of the best executed changes I've seen in this game, where right, you lose 10% of your mana pool, but you gain 10% damage if you're able to land a skill shot. And this is I think in many ways like so eloquent. I need to silence my phone. Sorry about that. Okay. We'll try again. So again, her mana pool nerfed until level 16, you know, by 10 to eventually 0%, and then of course buffed at the very end. This doesn't really meaningfully change a lot if you're like going for a Tear of the Goddess or Rod of Ages, things like this. Once you're getting your first buy, your mana pool is essentially infinite anyway. As far as the actual ability power you're getting through a Seraph's Embrace, it's almost meaningless as well. So this doesn't really mean anything outside of her early laning phase. Again, she buys mana regardless, so this means basically nothing by mid-game. That nerfs her early laning phase. And then again, there's this change to the ability power and the base damage of her Twin Fang. If you don't know the mechanics of how Cassiopeia's E works, her E has a base damage that simply scales with character level. It's 52 plus 4 per character level. And then if they are poisoned, then it looks at what rank your E is of the Twin Fang and then adds bonus damage on top. And so this is, because we only looked at the poisoned damage, right? It's the only number that got changed. This is the total poisoned damage of a Twin Fang before and after the patch. Again, in the first 4 levels, this ability simply does more damage and or has a higher AP ratio. So in the first 4 levels, if you poison and hit E, you're doing more damage than before. Again, your mana pool is more constrained. By and large, this is not going to buff her laning phase. It pretty much cannot. There's a way in which you can consider it to be the case, but meh. Not really likely to happen is the end of the situation here. But basically, because the AP ratio went up by 0.05, it's very, very easy for Cassiopeia to have 300 ability power by late game. If you're level 7, you don't have 200 AP. If you're level 5, you don't have 100 AP. You know, around the time you have ultimates, Cassiopeia is weaker. So her early laning phase is more poison reliant, but less good if you don't have poison on them, which generally means it hurts her early game. At level 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it is 100% definitely weaker champion, so nerf to the mid game. But once you are into full build Cassiopeia, your damage is higher because of the AP ratio. At 300 AP, your damage is equal. At 301 AP, your damage is buffed. Cassiopeia is a stronger late game champion and a weaker lane bully, which I think makes these changes really well executed. I think this has very little actual impact in solo queue win rates, because I think if you're like a gold 3 Cassiopeia, you're not E-spamming people at level 1 very frequently, or at least not doing it well. And if you're playing Clown Fiesta, where everyone has 17 kills and you're a full build Cassiopeia, you're stronger. So there's a decent chance this actually could buff her in solo queue. That said, people who are not pros are very bad at using mana pool properly, so you know, we'll see this actually nerf solo queue. Anyway, end result is I think these are really smart Cassiopeia changes, and they should actually knock her down a little bit in pro play, but also sharpen her role as a late game carry and less of a bully. Corki losing 3 base attack damage. Here's the end result of the nerfs. It's, you know, 5 to 2.5% based on his levels. He actually has really high AD scaling, going up to 114. It's actually quite high for a marksman. I'm a little surprised at that, but whatever. Corki was definitely a pretty top tier, you know, mid marksman. He's at right about 50% win rate in solo queue. These nerfs are fairly small. A 3 base AD doesn't often mean that much. You know, there's some level of value here, but it's not insane. And, you know, 55 AD is not a bad level 1 attack damage, so we should be able to last it without any major issues. He has spells to wave clear. He gets a blue buff, things like this. It shouldn't be a major issue. But this should just take him down a small peg. Again, he'll be a little bit less of a lane bully, considering that he's an 80% crit, you know, high scaling marksman. He doesn't need good early game because this guy has great late game damage and great roaming and things like this. Small buffs to Fizz is E. Many Fizzes will still max E first, so the buffs don't matter once you're level 9. Although if you got an extra couple of CS in the early game, then it does matter for the rest of the game. But a lot of Fizzes also can do things like maxing W first. Maybe you're facing a melee matchup like a Galio or a Cassidon, or you just simply have the ability to get in on your opponents because they're a little bit slow. I don't know Fizzes matchups, to be honest, so I couldn't really tell you very easily. I think he's supposed to be good against TF, for example. As a result of this, I think there's a decent chance that you know, Fizz gains from this, because if you don't max E first, you just get that cooldown benefit the entire time. Here's the percentage sort of look at this. It's a 12% lower cooldown at level 1. That's a pretty big deal, to be honest. And again, if you're not maxing it first, this is actually really substantial because you're going to keep that buff for quite a while. Galio's a mid laner who's been seeing a lot of play as well. Occasional spots in top. Sometimes he's there, but he's definitely a pretty highly sought after mid laner. So nerfs to the early cooldown of the ultimate and nerfs to the later ranks allied damage reduction. So this left side is his cooldown difference, 12% higher. I mean, this going to a 3-minute cooldown is definitely meaningful, right? Going from 3, 2.5, 2, from basically 240, 220, 2, certainly is meaningful. That said, his first ult's always going to still work, right? His first ultimate is unaffected because cooldown doesn't matter for your first spell, and the damage reduction is unchanged, so his early to mid game is really untouched at all. But he's less likely to get those big roaming plays off and helping out the jungler. Your jungler has to play more defensively now as a result. They have to play around a longer cooldown, and this can matter. The damage reduction, I actually, for the percentage thing here, actually looked at percent damage taken, because damage reduction is an interesting stat where the more you have of it, the more valuable the next point is. And so your teammate's taking 7 or 16% more damage while, you know, you're channeling your ult on them at rank 2 and 3, which is actually a pretty meaningful damage difference. So these definitely do move the needle with Galio. It's really unfortunate because Galio is a sub 50 win rate champion in solo queue, both top and mid. I was pushing for some AP ratio buffs. We didn't get them, sadly. This patch very much seemed to be aimed at pro play exclusively, which again I think is too bad. I would have liked them to buff solo queue a bit more in pro play, or sorry, yeah, would have liked to see them buff solo queue a bit more. It's actually really frequent that in solo queue people buy like Rod of Ages first items, so like small AP ratio buffs would have helped that. And I still think Galio's best served trying to, like, I think the most interesting Galio is the one that actually builds like a Rod of Ages or you know, a Banshee's Veil, an Abyssal Mask, things like this, and you know, gets a little bit of AP. But unfortunately in pro it's almost always pure tank, and I don't know, it's unfortunate. I think over time I want to see Galio have more and more changes to his base damage versus ratios and get him to actually build, you know, more like a Diana or something, right? But that said, I mean, Galio is still a tank, you know, unlike a champion like Fizz or something who just built full tank and it was weird. At least Galio makes sense building this way, so maybe we embrace it. But yeah, unfortunately, his ultimate is really, really good in coordinated play, much like Shen. So it's really of no surprise that Galio works better in pro play than solo queue, much like Shen. Just the way it is. LeBlanc loses 1/4 of the damage on her Shadow Orb minion damage. This multiplied everything, right? This multiplied the Shadow Orb, it multiplied Sigil of Malice, things like this. So her wave clear is down quite a bit. LeBlanc has been kind of going up and down in pro play. She's still obviously pretty frequently seen. Can still be a very, very scary lane bully. So the choice here for pro play was basically saying, well, LeBlanc can still do her duelist things. She just has worse wave clear, which I think, you know, is fine. I think if you nerf LeBlanc's actual strengths, it gets hard to find a reason to pick LeBlanc. Now you've got to make sure you can just deal with the wave clear differences. Because even though we are in a very tank-heavy meta, we're still seeing a lot of LeBlanc in pro. Mostly bans. People are just still so afraid of the champion. So, again, this champion's not insane for solo queue unless you're like really, really high elo. But if you're in like Challenger Master tier, I think LeBlanc is still pretty insane. Because snowballing is a thing. I don't play at that level. I never have to deal with this. But this does make a little bit of sense for pro play. Orianna is interesting because I'm kind of the opinion that, like, Orianna's not really overpowered. She just does everything, which, again, could be an issue, to be completely fair. And to be honest, you know, being a semi-reliable crowd control mage, having, you know, good wave clear, having pretty good defensive stats, being a pretty safe blind pick, you know, being able to shield people and, like, being part of the carry, like, Orianna's very Swiss Army knife, so it makes sense to try to sharpen her a little bit and, like, maybe cut a couple of the pieces off. And yeah, she's just been so frequently seen in pro play. It's just like, okay, at some point the nerfs were due. These nerfs are pretty small, which is nice, and so we'll go into them. Distance lost 10 flat damage, and Command Protect lost 20 flat shield. The damage on the E did not change at all. Also, there's a change to queuing up her W while casting Q. You don't have to hit it more, like, closer to the end location, which I don't believe has any differences in the actual application of damage. It just simply requires you to press W later on in the cast. This shouldn't have any gameplay impact on the receiving end as long as you play well. It shouldn't change much. So a quick look at the Orianna changes. Of course, the more AP you have, the less these changes matter. Of course, very much worth noting, Orianna's shield is left at 1 point until level 14. In almost all cases, I think there are some players who put 2 points in shield for specific matchups, but that's pretty rare. And again, AP ratio will carry this a little bit. And also, if you weren't blocking all 80 damage, of course, the shield rank doesn't matter. Also worth pointing out, again, the E damage didn't change, the E armor and MR didn't change. All these things are relevant points to consider. But anyway, yes, her effectiveness is down by a small bit. So hey, this hurts her wave clear slightly, hurts her dueling slightly. Yeah, all those things change. So this probably is like a 1 to 1.5% win rate nerf on Orianna. And she's still totally viable in pro play, obviously. But, you know, maybe less of an ubiquitous blind pick because the overall power is slightly down. Syndra, I know she went through a lot of revisions of what change they actually wanted to put onto her. Basically, Q was the tried and true lane bully spam this ability spell. Her mana pool is usually pretty good. She get a Lost Chapter and have kind of infinite mana, and so now she certainly still has the same ulti damage as before. So her, you know, gameplay press R button is exactly the same as it was, but at the very least, it's interesting because if you pressed R then E, it was basically guaranteed to land the stun, and that ratio went up. So if you miss every skill shot, and you miss Q, you miss W, and you're just like, screw it, R and then E, you actually got a damage buff. So the actual skillless Syndra got buffed. The hope is that Syndra is overall weaker as a result of these changes, because if you're actually winning a game as Syndra, you have to land a Dark Sphere at some point. Like, yes, RE got buffed, the skillless combo got buffed, and that's true. But if you never landed a Q on Syndra, you were never going to win a game anyway. So this getting nerfed, I think, actually does still, I would say in more cases than not, mean more than this. So I think this is still a net nerf to Syndra. Again, it nerfs her wave clear because she's less likely to one-shot casters or two-shot melees. This nerfs her dueling because, you know, unless you're really ahead, you're going to actually have to land a couple of Qs. So this does still nerf her a little bit. And again, the goal is, yeah, nerf her sustained damage. Taliyah was interesting because she actually, her mana costs were so good with this ability that she was one of the only mages I saw skip Lost Chapter. The most recent Taliyahs I've seen went Murktread's Banshee's Veil and was like, I'm invincible, you can't fight me. Because she just runs around with 120 magic resist and you just kind of lose the game. So this actually might make Taliyah have to buy a Lost Chapter, which means she can't buy Banshee's Veil anymore. And lo and behold, life is difficult. I know when LS does patch rundowns, he often talks about mana costs being covered up with Rune and Mastery changes. I don't think this is doable. I think this mana cost is so nerfed that this actually requires her to change her build. Maybe I'm wrong. I am not a good Taliyah player, but that's my thought. You can see here's the mana cost differences, and you can see it's a 20 to 43% mana increase. Like, this is really large. Now, certainly her entire combo does not cost as much more mana. I mean, it costs 30 more mana, certainly, but, you know, the percentage difference is obviously different. But she was pressing Q, you know, 2 to 3 times per wave to wave clear. And yeah, you get like a partial refund if you're on worked ground, things like this, but certainly is actually a meaningful change that might make her have to build differently. Taliyah is, again, super common mid laner. Taliyah also somewhat cannibalized Twisted Fate play because she was such a safe wave clear champion. TF is a bit more attackable of a laner, that if Taliyah goes down in value, TF can go up, and this might mean we see a bit more Taliyah as a result, or sorry, a bit more TF as a result, which I think is cool. I think Twisted Fate is a super interesting champion in pro play, and this has 2 benefits, which is 1, lowering the blind pick Taliyah rate, and again, making a greater chance that we see Twisted Fate. Minor nerfs to the Ancient Coin line, basically less missing mana restore, which is somewhat meaningful. I know a lot of people have been really complaining about Ancient Coin being overpowered. And in some cases, yes, Ancient Coin has been objectively overpowered on some champions. It's Thresh's best starting item, it's Alistar's best starting item, I'm pretty sure it's Tarek's best starting item. And of course, it's obviously best for things like Nami and Janna, because why would you go Spell Thieves anyway? So in some cases, it's unfair because people look at like things like Janna's and Soraka's win rates, and it's like, well, but they were already that good. Like, the Ancient Coin changes didn't really give them that much more win rate because, like, the Karma's got to buy this item too. Like, if you're looking at power level, you still have to look at it, like, in reference to the other champions in the role. and the other champions in the role got to also buy Ancient Coin. Now again, this item is still slightly too good. It's warping the item builds on too many champions. I think the goal for this item should be that you take a risk by buying it because it has the least combat stats. It gives you 5 CDR and some missing mana, and the missing mana went down by 1/3. So it gives you 5 CDR and a little bit of missing mana. Whereas Spell Thief gives you damage and ability power, and Relic Shield gives you health regen and your teammate health regen. And, you know, like all these things. And then when the quest is completed, arguably the other 2 quests are also better. So Ancient Coin will, and probably should, at least while it's an item in League of Legends, I don't know, maybe it gets a rework or something down the line, but if the Ancient Coin has this kind of stat line, it should probably always give you the most gold because it gives you the least other things. Like, that should just always be the case, and just pointing to gold I think is not quite fair. Again, was overpowered, is getting nerfed, that's nice. Cinderhulk was potentially slightly overpowered. Combined cost up by 75 gold. I actually ran some numbers on Cinderhulk overall. So this was 712, the old version of Cinderhulk, 713 where all the buffs came in, and now 716 where this set of nerf came in. So worth noting, the percent bonus HP on Cinderhulk, of course, multiplies the base health on the item, which is why it was 460, then 390, then again 390. Remember that 713 had the changes to Balmy Cinder being cheaper, to how much damage Cinderhulk actually dealt, and how much it dealt to monsters and whatnot. So the burn is different in this case. I actually don't mind this number, the 385. That's actually wrong. I had a copy paste error. Don't worry about that though. It's not really a big deal. The percentages are still correct though. These percentages are correct. So at the old Cinderhulk, 25% of the gold cost was in the burn damage, the percent HP, and then it got a bunch of changes, and then the burn got arguably better, and the percent bonus health obviously got better, and so the item got even more efficient, of course. And then now we're down a little bit where you're paying, I guess, 460 gold for, again, increased bonus HP and some similar burn. So in 712, you're paying 400 gold for burn and health, and now you're paying 460 for a sort of similar burn, but a much better bonus health. So Cinderhulk, I would argue, is still better in 716 than it was in 712, but overall is a slight nerf to the tank junglers, and maybe we see a bit more diversity as a result of those changes. Slightly overpowered, not too bad. Duskblade honestly seems to be working pretty much fine right now. I saw a Reddit thread a couple of weeks ago saying, this is actually really stupid, I felt, so I wanted to bring it up. It's clear Duskblade is a problem because it's the only item anyone's talking about. It's like, well, no, that's not okay. That's not, people are talking about the champion, so it must be OP is really stupid. I think that's a terrible way of explaining what's strong. It's like saying, how many people are in Challenger in this role? It's like, well, roles have popularity. It doesn't mean it's strong or weak. It means people like playing X role. You're silly otherwise. Duskblade seems to be pretty reasonable. We're seeing the item bot occasionally in pro. That said, even when we do see assassins in pro play, we're most often seeing Youmuu's first in pro play over Duskblade. Now, pro play tends to be a more roaming-based game. You know, if you're playing really, really good League of Legends, move speed is a more valuable stat. Like, move speed scales with player skill. So what it kind of comes down to is if Duskblade seems overpowered, you're not good enough at League of Legends to value Youmuu's Ghostblade, I guess, is what it kind of comes down to, which is reasonable. I mean, not everyone's pro, obviously, and you deserve to have a fun time playing League of Legends, but anyway, Duskblade seems fine from where I sit. It doesn't seem too metagame warping in my mind, so I think we're okay here. Enemy ward here has been added to a key binding menu in communication. Oh baby, you have to set it. It's not just on the it's not on the basic wheel, but you better bet you better bind this and ping where wards are. This is pretty sweet. This is exciting. You can ping wards. This is awesome. If you're playing a skin, in the bottom left corner of your HUD, you now see the skin splash. Minimap icons are unchanged. Loading screen obviously unchanged. That was already the skin. Minimap icons unchanged because you need to be able to recognize champions, but now you can see your portrait in the bottom left corner. Hey, sweet. The spectator team, I guess, chatted with a bunch of the esports people, me included. I went through the list myself and said, hey, here's indicators we want to add or remove or tweak in the game. So things like Gragas' Q barrel is going to have his indicator back, but there's going to be other ones that are disappearing because we don't need them. And if anything looks funny when you start watching the NA or EU LCS playoffs, then you can leave the feedback in there, and in 7.17 or 7.18 we can fix that up for a second round and have it all shiny for Worlds. So pay attention to indicators when watching playoffs for NA and EU, or anyone else who's played on 7.16, because changes. That's nice. You can pick skins earlier in champ select. Free-to-play champ rotation upping to 14 champions. I'm going to try to keep it at 14% of current champion pool. So, hey, 4 more champs in free champ rotation. Sweet. All random nerfs coming up for the rotating game mode. That's pretty sweet. Exciting, exciting. And then bug fixes. I went through this earlier. None of them are very big. They can have gameplay impacts. Like, theoretically, you could hit buildings twice with Twitch. Aurelia could occasionally miss things with Blade Surge, like Heimerdinger's turret could break, but none of these are very big, so honestly, not huge. Got some sweet skins coming out, as well as Pentakill Kale. Also, there's a minor texture update to the Pentakill skins. Lancer Zero Hecarim is Hextech Crafting exclusive. Chromos for Arcade Corki and Battle Blast Blitzcrank. Cool stuff. So, yay for visually appealing things. That's it for the patch rundown. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed. The explanations and everything makes sense. If you have comments, please leave them below. You guys are awesome, and I will catch you next time.